The cold wind whistled sharply across the ridge, tugging at the edges of the worn flight jacket that clung to Sarah Mitchell's slight frame. The mountaintop base camp was a small cluster of tents and weather-beaten equipment, perched precariously above a jagged drop to the valley below. Sarah's breath fogged in the frigid air as she adjusted the headset over her short, dark hair, eyes narrowed against the biting gusts. Around her, the other pilots lounged easily, their confident laughter carrying on the wind like a challenge. They didn't see the tight knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach, the invisible barrier she fought every time she looked down from the cockpit. "Hey Mitchell," called Jake, a burly pilot with a cocky grin and hands as steady as steel. "Still afraid of a little height, huh? Maybe you should stick to flying drones inside the hangar." His voice dripped with derision, drawing a chorus of chuckles from the group. Sarah forced a small smile, keeping her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky met the ragged peaks. The last thing she wanted was to give them ammunition. "Come on, Sarah," Maria chimed in, her tone more teasing than cruel but no less dismissive. "We've all seen you freeze up when it gets rough. You sure you're up for this?" The question hung in the thin mountain air like a challenge. Sarah's fingers curled tight around the strap of her helmet. Inside, a fierce determination burned beneath the surface, but it was masked by the tremor in her voice as she replied, "I can fly. You'll see." The radio crackled suddenly, breaking the banter. "Base to all units, emergency alert. Hikers trapped on the north cliffside after a sudden rockslide. Conditions dangerous, immediate response required." The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. The group stiffened, the mountain was unforgiving, and stranded hikers meant a race against time and nature. Jake smirked, nudging Maria. "Looks like the brass wants Sarah to take the lead. Bet they're just trying to see how long she lasts up there." The words stung more than Sarah let on. She adjusted her headset and stepped toward the waiting helicopter, the rotors humming a low, ominous drone. The others followed more slowly, casting glances that mixed out with grudging respect for the mission's gravity. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the fear she could never fully silence. Looking down from the open door, the dizzying drop to the rocky ledges below made her throat tighten. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, willing the panic to fade. This was what she had trained for, even if no one outside this cockpit believed it. Her fingers danced over the controls, the familiar weight grounding her as the chopper lifted off, battling the fierce mountain winds. The cabin filled with the steady hum of the engine and the crackling radios, but Sarah's focus narrowed to the task ahead. The cliffs loomed closer, jagged and treacherous, the recent rockslide a scar of shattered boulders and dirt. The hikers' voices came faintly over the radio, frightened, disoriented, desperate. "Steady, steady," Sarah muttered, her voice barely more than a whisper. The wind buffeted the helicopter, and for a moment her breath hitched as the copter dipped sharply. But she righted the controls, muscles taut with concentration. The team watched, some still skeptical, others holding their breath. Her mind flickered with memories she kept buried, the reckless thrill of stunt flying before the accident, the sudden plunge that shattered her confidence, the long months of clawing back from the edge. She had returned to the skies broken but unbowed, hiding her acrophobia beneath layers of discipline and grit. Nobody here knew the full story. Nobody saw the private battles waged in the quiet hours before dawn. "Sarah, you've got this," she whispered to herself, voice steadying. The ledge where the hikers awaited appeared, a narrow shelf carved into the side of the cliff, barely wide enough for the helicopter's skids. The swirling winds made landing a deadly gamble, but there was no alternative. Lives depended on her skill, on her courage to face the heights that still haunted her. "Prepare for landing," she announced, voice firm. The others tensed, the tension palpable as the chopper dipped lower, the rotor blades slicing the air in a blur. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, compensating for gusts and turbulence. Her eyes flicked to the altimeter, then to the precarious ledge beneath them. A sudden gust pushed the helicopter sideways, and Sarah's heart lurched. For a split second, the old fear surged, threatening to seize her. But she gritted her teeth, tightening her grip on the controls, grounding herself in the mechanics of flight. The chopper settled gently onto the ledge, skids scraping against the rocky surface. "Touchdown," she said, the relief in her voice barely contained. The crew sprang into action, ropes and harnesses deployed to reach the stranded hikers clinging to the cliff face. Sarah's eyes scanned the faces of the trapped group, wide-eyed, exhausted, but alive. She felt a surge of purpose, a rush that drowned out the fear. The other pilots exchanged looks, some incredulous, others impressed despite themselves. They had doubted her, mocked her hesitation, but here she was, steady, capable, leading in a moment that demanded everything. Sarah allowed herself a brief, private smile. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when her hidden strength would become undeniable. As the rescue operation began, Sarah's thoughts raced. The mountain was unforgiving, and the weather could turn at any second. Yet beneath the anxiety was a resolute core, a fierce determination to prove not just to them, but to herself, that fear was not weakness. It was a challenge to be met head-on, a test of will as much as skill. The wind howled around the chopper, carrying the sound of shouted instructions and the scrape of ropes. Sarah's knuckles whitened on the controls, but her hands were steady. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical. The team's lives, the hikers' futures, depended on her. And she would not fail them. "Hold tight," she said quietly, the words meant as much for herself as for the stranded hikers. The mountain's shadow stretched long as the sun dipped behind the peaks, but Sarah's resolve burned bright. Today, she would climb not just the cliffs but the invisible walls inside herself, proving that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Months before that bitter morning on the mountaintop, Sarah sat alone in the dim glow of the flight simulator, the hum of the machinery the only sound in the cavernous hangar. The room was stark, walls lined with posters of daring pilots and legendary rescues, but none of that seemed to reach the tight coil of tension inside her chest. Her hands hovered hesitantly over the joystick, trembling slightly as she prepared to face the invisible barrier that had haunted her ever since the accident. She remembered that day with vivid clarity, the rush of adrenaline as she soared through the sky, the thrill of executing a flawless barrel roll, and then the sudden, sickening jolt as the plane spun out of control. The world had twisted beneath her, and the ground rushed up with terrifying speed. She had survived, but the crash had left more than physical scars. Fear had rooted deep inside her, twisting into a relentless acrophobia that no amount of training could shake. Back then, Sarah had been fearless, a stunt pilot known for her audacious maneuvers and steady nerves. Her reputation had been built on pushing limits, dancing on the edge of danger with grace. But after the accident, every climb into the cockpit became a battle. Heights that once exhilarated now paralyzed her. The very sky she loved had turned into a cage. Yet, she refused to surrender. Night after night, after the hangar had emptied and the world outside had fallen silent, Sarah returned to the simulator. Alone, she practiced hovering over virtual cliffs, navigating turbulent winds, and executing delicate landings. Each session chipped away at the walls her fear had built, though the progress was slow and often painful. Her phone buzzed beside her, a message from Maria lighting up the screen. "You sure you want to keep doing this? Maybe it's time to accept limits." Sarah's jaw clenched. She knew Maria's words carried doubt, not malice, but they stung nonetheless. The skepticism of her colleagues was a constant shadow, a reminder that her struggle was unseen and unacknowledged. She typed back a simple reply, "I'm not done yet." Outside the simulator, Sarah's training extended beyond the controls. She studied rescue techniques, poring over manuals on mountain survival, emergency medical aid, and rappelling. She spent hours at the climbing gym, pushing her body to endure heights and grips that triggered her panic. Every small victory was a quiet rebellion against the fear that threatened to define her. Her relationship with Jake was more complicated. His blunt lack of faith was a thorn she couldn't ignore. During briefings, his sideways glances and snide remarks chipped at her confidence, but they also fueled her resolve. She learned to mask her anxiety behind a calm exterior, even as her heart raced beneath the surface. In moments alone, she replayed his words and transformed them into motivation. "They don't see you, Sarah," Captain Lewis had said one afternoon during a rare moment of encouragement. "But I do. Keep proving them wrong." His words were a lifeline, fragile but real. Sarah clung to them as she pushed through the hardest days. As the days passed, the emergency calls became more frequent, each one a test she could not avoid. The team's trust was slow to build, her reserved nature and visible apprehension made her an easy target for whispered doubts. Yet Sarah kept moving forward, each mission a step toward reclaiming the fearless pilot she once was. Her interactions with Maria remained tinged with a mix of pity and disbelief. During a particularly tense briefing, Maria had sighed, "You're meticulous, I'll give you that. But when it counts, will you freeze again?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Sarah had met her gaze steadily, replying, "I won't." The weight of expectation pressed down as the rescue mission approached. Sarah spent sleepless nights rehearsing every scenario, replaying her past triumphs and failures in her mind. The memory of the crash lingered, a dark cloud threatening to eclipse her determination. But with it came a spark, a fierce promise not to let fear dictate her future. On the day of the mission, as she prepared to take the controls, Sarah's thoughts flickered to those moments of solitude in the simulator, the hours of climbing and study, the whispered doubts and quiet affirmations. Each memory was a brick in the foundation of her resolve. The crew gathered around, their faces a mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. Jake's smirk was there, as was Maria's wary glance, but beneath it all, Sarah sensed a subtle shift. They were watching, waiting to see if she could rise to the challenge or crumble beneath the pressure. As the helicopter engines roared to life, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, tempered now by a hard-earned steadiness. The mountain awaited, treacherous and unforgiving, but so did she. The collision of past fears and present courage forged a new strength within her, one that would carry her through the storm. With a final breath, she gripped the controls, ready to face the heights that had once held her captive. The mountain rescue was not just a mission, it was a test of everything she had become, and everything she still had to prove. The helicopter sliced through the turbulent mountain air, the blades beating a relentless rhythm against the howling wind. Sarah's eyes were sharp, scanning the narrow canyon walls that closed in on either side like silent sentinels. Each gust threatened to shove the chopper off course, but her hands, steady despite the pounding of her heart, guided the aircraft with precision. The old fear tugged at her, an echo of panic rising in her chest, but she quelled it with practiced breaths, focusing on the seconds ahead, on the lives waiting on that precarious ledge. The radio crackled intermittently, the voices of her crew weaving between commands and reassurances. Sarah's voice was calm, clipped, a lifeline amid the chaos. Adjusting for wind shear, lowering altitude to approach the ledge. Hold tight. The rocky outcrop loomed closer, a jagged slice of earth clinging to the cliff face, barely wide enough for the helicopter's skids. Below, the stranded hikers huddled together, faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The helicopter dipped suddenly as a rogue gust caught the tail rotor, and Sarah's grip tightened instinctively. For a moment, the chopper swayed, the ground rushing up in a blur of stone and shadow. Her breath hitched, the old terror clawing its way to the surface. But then she forced herself to focus, muscles coiling with determination. The controls responded smoothly under her touch, and she righted the aircraft with a quiet command. "Almost there," she murmured, voice steady despite the storm inside. The skids scraped against the rocky ledge, sending up a scatter of dust and small stones. Sarah's fingers danced over the controls, compensating for the shifting winds, ensuring the helicopter remained steady. The crew began deploying ropes and harnesses, moving swiftly to reach the stranded hikers. A flicker of doubt crossed the faces of the other pilots watching from the base camp, but here in the cockpit, Sarah was resolute. Beneath the surface, years of secret training with mountain rescue teams surged to the forefront, rappelling drills, emergency medical procedures, survival tactics, all rehearsed countless times in solitude. Her acrophobia was no longer a shackle but a challenge she had transformed into strength. She glanced at the hikers now, their relief palpable as rescuers secured each one, guiding them to safety. Her hands remained steady on the controls, her focus unbroken as she managed every shift of the helicopter with care. The wind howled around them, but inside the cockpit, a fierce calm reigned. "Lead secure," her co-pilot reported, voice tinged with awe. "You're doing great, Sarah." A small, tired smile touched her lips. The fear was still there, a shadow at the edges of her mind, but it no longer ruled her. She had faced it head-on, each moment of flight a battle won. As the last hiker was lifted safely aboard, the helicopter rose, the blades cutting through the mountain air with renewed purpose. Sarah guided the craft away from the cliff, navigating the treacherous winds back toward base. The crew's eyes were on her, expressions shifting from doubt to respect. "Mission accomplished," she announced softly, the weight of the moment settling over her. The rescue was not just a victory for the hikers, but a testament to her resilience. In the quiet moments that followed, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, the months of training, the battles with fear, the unwavering resolve to reclaim her place in the sky. She had transformed her vulnerability into power, proving that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. As the helicopter touched down and the crew disembarked, the murmurs of admiration were unmistakable. Sarah met their gazes, no longer the trembling pilot they had doubted but a leader forged in the crucible of challenge and triumph. The mountain still loomed, indifferent and unyielding, but so did she, steady, strong, and ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the base camp as Sarah stepped down from the helicopter. The crisp mountain air was tinged with the faint scent of pine and the lingering adrenaline of the day's rescue. Around her, the crew moved with a newfound respect, their earlier skepticism replaced by nods of acknowledgement and quiet congratulations. Jake approached first, his usual smirk softened into a genuine smile. "Didn't think you had it in you," he admitted, clapping her on the shoulder with a rough warmth. Maria was close behind, her eyes meeting Sarah's with an unspoken apology nestled beneath the steady gaze. "You earned every bit of that praise," she said. The shift in their attitudes was palpable, a transformation from doubt to admiration that settled heavily, yet gratifyingly, on Sarah's shoulders. Inside the briefing tent, Captain Lewis stood waiting, a rare smile breaking his usually stoic demeanor. He handed Sarah a commendation, the official seal gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "This is well deserved," he said firmly. "You showed what real leadership looks like when it counts." The applause from the gathered team was genuine, echoing the hard-won respect Sarah had earned. Later, as the camp began to quiet and the stars pierced the clear mountain sky, Sarah found herself drawn to the edge of the cliff where the rescue had unfolded. The ledge below, once a perilous trap, now seemed serene in the fading light. She knelt, tracing a finger over the rough stone, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Fear, she realized, was not a chain but a companion, one that could coexist with strength if faced with courage. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft crunch of footsteps behind her. Sarah turned to see Maria, holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, voice gentle. Inside was a letter from Sarah's sister, a rare connection to a life beyond the mountains and the helicopter. The words inside spoke of gratitude and hope, reminding Sarah that her fight was not just for herself but for those who believed in her. As she folded the letter, a new report crackled over the radio, warnings of a severe storm brewing, threatening isolated communities across the region. The rescue mission was over, but another challenge loomed on the horizon. Sarah's eyes narrowed with determination. The mountain's dangers were far from over, and she was ready to face them head-on. The camp stirred to life again as preparations began for the next operation. Sarah stood among her team, the weight of responsibility settling comfortably on her shoulders. She no longer saw fear as an obstacle but as a force to be harnessed, a source of power that had shaped her into the pilot she was becoming. As the first gusts of the approaching storm whispered through the trees, Sarah's gaze lifted to the darkening sky. The helicopter's blades began to turn, a steady hum rising in the growing wind. With steady hands on the controls and a heart forged by trial, she prepared to lead her team once more into the unknown, ready to meet whatever trials the mountain would send. The path ahead was uncertain, but Sarah embraced it with open eyes and unwavering resolve. Fear had not been conquered, it had been transformed. And in that transformation lay the true measure of courage. The sky was a bruised canvas of grays and purples, the first heavy clouds gathering like an ominous warning over the rugged mountain range. The base camp buzzed with urgent activity as crews loaded supplies and checked equipment, the threat of the coming storm sharp in every furrowed brow and clipped command. Sarah stood at the center of it all, helmet cradled in her arms, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the wind teased the treetops into restless waves. She had changed since the rescue mission, a transformation deeper than the medals or the nods of approval. Fear, once a relentless adversary, had become a quiet companion, a measuring stick against which she gauged her strength. Now, that strength was a beacon for others. Trainees gathered around her during breaks, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and hope, hanging on her every word as she shared the lessons forged in the sky's unforgiving crucible. "Fear isn't the enemy," she told them, voice steady and sure. "It's what you do with it that counts. You don't have to be fearless. You have to be brave enough to keep going anyway." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like a promise. She had become more than a pilot, she was a mentor, a leader shaping others to face their own shadows. The steady hum of another helicopter approached, and Sarah's eyes lifted to the sky. A fellow pilot's voice crackled over the radio, strained and tense. "Base, we're picking up a distress signal from a remote peak, coordinates coming through now. Conditions are rough, but it's urgent. The room shifted instantly from calm to controlled urgency. Sarah's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the raw edge of purpose. She grabbed her gear, the familiar heft grounding her. Captain Lewis caught her eye, a nod passing between them that spoke volumes. This was no longer just a mission, it was a calling. The storm was coming, but so was Sarah, ready to meet it head-on. As she climbed into the helicopter, the engines roared to life, blades slicing through the thickening air. The weight of the unknown pressed in, but Sarah welcomed it. The pilot's seat was no longer a place of dread but one of power and possibility. Her hands gripped the controls, steady as ever, eyes sharp beneath the visor. The distress signal pulsed steadily in her headset, a beacon in the gathering gloom. The coordinates led them higher, into the swirling mists and jagged peaks that tested every ounce of skill and nerve. The storm's fury was a tempest of ice and wind, but Sarah's focus was unbreakable. She navigated the treacherous path with a calm born of hard-won experience. Inside the cabin, the team moved with practiced efficiency, trusting her lead as the helicopter danced on the edge of the storm. Sarah's mind was clear, every decision deliberate and precise. The fear that once threatened to consume her was now a tool, a spark of awareness that sharpened her senses and steadied her resolve. As the helicopter neared the remote peak, the distress signal grew stronger, a lifeline in the chaos. Sarah's voice cut through the cockpit, calm but commanding. "Prepare for landing. This is what we've trained for." The skids touched down briefly on a narrow outcrop, the storm's fury battering the aircraft, but Sarah's hands held firm. The team deployed swiftly, moving into the swirling snow and wind. Sarah stayed at the controls, the eye of determination amid the storm's rage. Every second was a test of will, a battle against nature's relentless assault. But she was ready. They were ready. As the rescue unfolded, Sarah's mind raced ahead, already planning the next steps, the next challenges. The mountain was vast, unpredictable, and often merciless. But so was she, transformed, unyielding, a beacon of courage forged in the crucible of fear and triumph. The storm hulled around them, but inside the helicopter, a steady light shone. Sarah's grip on the controls was unwavering, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the promise of survival and hope awaited beyond the tempest. This was more than a rescue. It was a declaration that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, and that Sarah Mitchell was ready to lead the way.